I indulge in a lot of anime and manga, constantly looking for the next series that really hits me, and that can be for a number of reasons. Either being cool art styles, awesome animation, great music, and that's only naming a few things. But definitely one of my favorite things is seeing stories that wouldn't be possible in most other forms of media, typically because of the long-form narratives or for how out there the concept is. Only here can you have a story about a teenage boy using rocks and sticks to bring back the world. An entire series about intense strategic mind games all done with food. Whatever the hell Gintama is, and while I can definitely talk about these shows for a good while, the ones I want to focus on today are a certain magical index and a certain scientific railgun. The Raildex series is such an anomaly when it comes to anime. For an industry where a show is lucky enough to get a second season, this one has several entries across different anime, adding up to over 100 episodes in a movie altogether. Which is insane because with the amount of content, you would think that it would be mega popular since it's getting massive shonen level numbers. But it's still pretty obscure. When the Japanese site Sharapedia asked fans to rank their most excited anime for fall 2018, Index Season 3 got second, only losing to Sword Art Online, and even when Anime News Network did their own poll with their own readers, it ended up being number 1. How did this series about a guy with a weird hand, a walking bug zapper, and a lolly nun beat out the likes of Fairy Tail and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure twice? It's one of my favorite franchises in anime and I've always wanted to talk about it, but that isn't a simple task. Now that I'm done rewatching 4 entries with almost 100 episodes, I'm now ready to, and hopefully the question will be answered along the way. This video will only cover the first 2 seasons of Index and Railgun because those were made in a vacuum at a very unique point in time. I definitely want to talk about the later entries, but I just can't act like there wasn't a 5-year time gap. Also, this will be more of an overview of the franchise, so you don't have to worry about spoilers. I just want to clear up any confusion before we begin, so with that out the way, let's go. We're going to be starting in the most appropriate place, the setting that both take place in, Academy City. The most technologically advanced city in the world where science is at the forefront of everything. Having automated robots, advanced AI that help dictate elements of the city, and of course experiments to advance the world even more. And with those experiments comes espers, super-powered humans whose abilities are based on specific laws of science. The city being based around data has created an entire power system that determines the strengths of an esper, level 1 being the lowest and level 5 being the highest, which is where Toma Kamijo comes in. A level 0 meaning he has no abilities and is just a normal human being, where he meets Index, a strange nun, and learns about a whole other secret world, that of magic. One that is at odds with science, and from here on he gets thrusted at the forefront of these worlds colliding. And this is because while he may be a level 0, he actually has an ability, that of Imagine Breaker, the power to negate any supernatural ability when in contact with his right hand. But he's an anomaly because he was raised on the science side, but his ability isn't, so it puts him in the center of everything. So he gets involved not only in magic, but science as well, which is where he meets Mikoto Nisaka, the 3rd strongest level 5 esper, the Railgun. With this, the show now has 2 people who were raised in each world with very deep ties to it, so they serve as a great representation of both. So let's talk about the worlds, specifically the logic of them. Raildex ties itself to reality in a clever way. Esper abilities are based on real science while the basis of magic is religion. And this is where it plays with your expectation, and it does this by knowing when and when not to give you information. And what I mean by this is that typically in media where magic or a supernatural force is involved, you never question it since it's not real. We take it at face value because it's fictional like the thing we're watching. The world of Espers on the other hand is based on real science and laws, so the show goes out of its way to tell you all the information on it, from how a specific ability works to experiments. Since it's real, you can question it, and by doing so the science side strengthens itself because all those answers enhance it. While magic, we never question it. Seeing these much weirder, more fantastical abilities we just accept because it's magic. And it makes sense when you think about it. When your world is based on public real information, of course they're going to tell you everything since they have nothing to hide. While the other is more fictional, so it makes sense to keep that information hidden and just play with the viewer's mind. Academy City is an entire society based around science, since it's proving itself and pushing humanity forward. While having a society based purely on fact and reality sounds promising, it turns out to be one of its biggest weaknesses. The inhabitants are so rooted in what they know, the moment something doesn't fall in line with that, they don't question. And since religion is the basis of magic, something someone who only believes in the logical would never think of, it makes total sense why they don't know about it. Meaning that when a magician comes to the city, no one knows. Index is also someone with a very deep and powerful history to it, so a lot of people are attracted to her. But the other thing is that since science is also the enemy of magic, Academy City is also a target. Since Toma is the only one that knows about it, he can't get help from the city. Even mentioning something slightly illogical to someone on the science side will make them not believe him, which the show presents immediately.
What's the problem? Can you describe the issue in detail for me? Magic? Seriously? What do you think you're doing, making a prank call at this hour? It's nearly midnight.
Meaning he's either completely on his own or getting an assist from a very small group of people when it comes to stopping them and keeping the peace of both worlds. Railgun focusing on Misaka changes everything because you're seeing the world from the perspective of an Esper, someone who by default is rooted in the workings and ideology of the city. So we're going from someone accidentally getting involved in a secret society to someone at the forefront of this well-known world. And since this is all within that, it means the relationship with it is also different, where all the weird abilities are the norm, so you see them used all the time like it's no big deal because it isn't. You see them especially for all the crimes that take place, and when you're one of the strongest espers in the city that everyone knows about, you get involved in them a lot. The best place to see all of this is the beginning of Railgun because it's meant to be a contrast to that of Index's. Toma choosing to get involved with some thugs while Misaka doesn't. All his fights being massive, happening at night while her are in broad daylight and are small. Railgun starts off like Index having Misaka by herself, then having a partner, similar to Toma, but instead of staying with 2 as the focus, it immediately becomes 4. 2 of them even being involved in government organizations to stop crimes and keep the peace of the city. It wastes no time in telling you that this isn't gonna be the same show you just watched. It even has the same type of power used in both to show how different science and magic are. So let's talk about that and how battles work here. Magic follows less rules, so magicians can have a wide range of abilities that keep the battles interesting because a single enemy can either be really good at a single type of magic or several in different areas, but also because the magic they use can have unique properties. Again, it's using what you know to its advantage. Using the environment to make a monster that doesn't need direct commands, the properties of the setting completely changing because of a spell. So many things can change because it's not grounded to reality. Ironically, less rules mean there are more mechanics to take into account, like how magicians can use items as a means to activate their powers, each of course being unique. All these aspects make the fights very dynamic because it's much harder to make a strategy since so many things can change on the fly. So much time is spent on just trying to figure out how the magic works, and because it has less rules, it's usually pretty simple to work against. While Esper abilities are the complete opposite. They're based on science, so that means they're appropriately a lot stricter because actual rules dictate their properties, which is why there is a level system for them since it's easier to measure. Power systems are no stranger to anime, as we've seen it done in so many ways. In essence, it's just a way to implement superpowers in the world while still making it believable. It's served as a visual for improvement and growth of the characters, but if a power system is too strict, it can harm the story as it leaves little room for improvement. Fairy Tail is an easy go-to for this since all the characters are introduced to have one type of magic. Natsu being fire, Gray being ice, Urza being armor, you get the idea. They're very to the point without any flexibility to them, and that's the problem. It's that it's so strict that when they are put into a position of disadvantage, there isn't really anything that forces them to change their ability. So the only way to defeat their enemy is to break the rules of the power system or get a power-up out of nowhere. You mainly see this with Natsu since he starts off with fire, and then during the fight with Hades is losing and then eats lightning and wins, but it also happens several times before and it's not even consistent. In the fight with Jalal, he eats crystals, gets a power up. When he fights Zankro, it is stated that Godfire can't be eaten and Natsu gets it anyway. Also, these are temporary, but lightning is permanent. I genuinely love Fairy Tail, I'm sorry. Science doesn't fall into this problem because what makes it so unique is that since espers are based around real science and only have one ability, to get the most out of it you need to know the full science behind it. So even though an Esper has one ability, it can be used in several different ways, which might not seem like a big deal until you remember its incredibly tiny and precise details they have to keep track of. So in layman's terms, they're in general super smart because of this, processing information much quicker, which allows them to adapt easier, meaning that an Esper's level isn't just a reflection of their strengths, but of their intellect as well. Imagine Breaker puts Toma in this interesting position because it makes him incredibly powerful and weak at the same time. It negates any supernatural phenomena, but only when he comes into contact with his right hand, meaning that he can face any opponent of any power level, but it still isn't an even match. He knows that powerful opponents on both ends rely heavily on their abilities, which means when you take that away, they have nothing. So while their goal is to kill him, his is much simpler: close the gap. Creating these David vs. Goliath type battles where his opponents are using everything to destroy him, while he's using anything to barely survive and get an advantage until he finds his opening. But while he's immune to abilities, that doesn't make him invincible. His power has specific requirements to work, so that means there are ways to get around it. Using an ability directly at him won't work, but using it on an object against him, his hand won't save him. Or just fighting him on his level completely changes everything. It makes the battle super fun, and it's incredibly satisfying when you see espers or magicians who think of themselves as gods slowly lose their cool, getting brought back down to earth, being reminded that they're still human. It's so good. While Index's battles were David vs. Goliath, Railguns are multiple Goliaths playing a chess game. Seeing espers fight each other using their powers and intellect to the fullest. That alone makes them a big departure from the ones in Index, but also how the powers work. Since it's based on science, when they fight, there's nothing that will drastically change the course of battle. It's just two people using literally everything around them to win. And it could be as simple as using some of it as weapons or a shield down to using the actual chemical makeup and properties. And this is one of my favorite things about Railgun, because while there is a power system, it isn't absolute. Every Esper has only one ability, so it's possible to figure out the science of your opponent and build a strategy around that, meaning that a level 5 can easily struggle with someone low level as much as with a level 4 or 5. It doesn't make the fights obvious. It actually makes them more interesting because you want to see how low levels compensate for the gap, as well as see high level superhuman fights, both forcing the Espers to use everything to try to gain the advantage. Even though they are very different to each other, they do have one thing in common. There isn't a simple good or evil view of the sides. It might have come off that Magic is the antagonist because they're always attacking Academy City. Like Toma, there are people who try to keep the peace of the universe, but they are smaller cogs in this much bigger machine, one that has its own ulterior motives. While science presents itself as this perfect solution to everything, it has a much darker secret side to it. So even though Toma and Misaka are involved in their own worlds, they still can't trust them. They're wildcards that Magic and Science know of, and both are keeping an eye on. There is a lot to take in with Railgun and Index. All the mechanics of both can even be confusing if you don't know the series. It's a pretty simple watch that doesn't complicate things, but a lot of people don't know that. Raildex has been mistakenly categorized in the same place with the Monogatari series and Haruhi anime because of the quote-unquote watch orders, scaring people off from even checking it out, but that's not the case, and I'm here to set the record straight on that. While there are a few ways of watching it, being sequel order as in seeing the shows separate, being Index 1 and Index 2, then Railgun and Railgun S, or chronological, seeing the shows in the actual order they take place in, being Railgun, Index, Railgun S, and then Index 2, the best way to watch the series is release order, and there are many reasons why. I could have made individual videos focusing on each as its own because a lot of people see them separate to each other because of how different they are and because one is a spin-off, but I didn't because I see them more as companion pieces because of how much they make each other better. Railgun benefits because there are many moments that it expects you to already know because of Index, so it doesn't go out of its way to re-explain them. Season 1 uses it to its advantage to be able to jump right into all the new stuff since the basics were already covered. There are moments where if you didn't watch Index, they still completely work, but you get more out of it if you did because you're naturally aware of what's going on and what they're talking about. Like this one.
I'm actually a full year behind her.
Yet you're roommates.
I saw to it that her previous roommate was reassigned. Then I took her place here. It was simple enough to do. It was all totally legal, of course. Today is the 1-month anniversary of when fate decreed that we would be bound together. 1 whole month, sissy. Exactly 1 month ago, by some random chance, you and I became roommates. Since then, we've eaten together and slept together, shared each other's joys and sorrows. All right here, in this very room! But you don't remember, do you?
And this is just for a small comedic moment. It makes it funnier because you know she's lying super hard. It makes you more involved in the narrative and characters. There are several times where you are more in the loop of what's going on in Misaka's world than any of her friends, which is really satisfying, but mainly stresses the underlying solitude she's feeling at certain points in her show. Railgun taking place before and during every season of Index, you already know things that are going to happen, so it plays with that. Having moments where a small piece of dialogue or visual cue appears, making it all click where you are in the timeline, completely changing the context of scenes not just in Railgun but in Index as well. But again, they're typically really subtle that they aren't distracting. While Index benefits because of all the expansion Railgun does. It's more rooted in magic, so the mechanics and world of science are briefly covered throughout its run. You never question where the rest of the information is because when it's given to you, it's only the important parts that are relevant to Toma at the time. So it never feels like it's being lazy not telling you everything, and also with how packed Index is, there would never be an appropriate time to explore that without feeling forced. Railgun releasing after every season of Index, it answers all the questions you didn't know you had from it. Here it makes total sense to go into all that stuff, having multiple espers as the focus. Talking about the ins and outs of the city, it feels completely natural, making rewatches of Index completely different from the first viewing. When I was watching Railgun after Index, it hit me so hard how far removed Toma is from the norm of the city. Usually since the viewer is seeing everything through the main character, the weirdness they know is just assumed to be how the world works since everything revolves around them. But the moment we see it through Misaka, you become aware of how false that is and realize how much weight he has to carry. You also see how perfect the city looks to her knowing it's far from it. But this is only scratching the surface of both. With the time frame and placement of the entries, each series acts as if you've seen the last one, and it does this by having smaller characters from both appear in each other, acting as if they've always been here because they have. JC staff factored in when the entries would be released so that when someone or something appeared, you would know what that is. Not needing to reintroduce them while also being a great way to emphasize how close yet distant the two worlds are. Some characters are more relevant than others depending on the series, so it doesn't make sense to look into them in one but the other. For example, if we take a look at Kuroko, she briefly appears in Index being normal, but if we go to Index 2, she's completely different, much more exaggerated, which might seem like a leap for her character, but if you've seen Railgun, you know she's always been like that. And with Ueharu being introduced there, it makes her appearance and interaction here with Kuroko completely natural. But this is just the beginning because this extends to several others. The franchise occasionally focusing on smaller stories completely removed from Toma, Misaka, and Index that are about the inhabitants of the world, and it can delve into them since you already know them. So you end up learning so much about them, and you can even get interested in them because they have their own interesting lives as well. It overall makes the city feel much more alive because of how many things are happening even though we don't see it, meaning there can be an endless number of things going on that we aren't aware of, yet. Railgun makes you want to rewatch the last season of Index because of all the extra context it adds, completely changing how you view specific scenes, while Railgun benefits because of how much you know what is happening and what will happen in the world, and that's the beauty of Raildex, using both series to fill in the gaps of the others, solidifying the universe and characters more and more. Kazuma Kamachi is the mind behind Raildex, and while he's done a number of other series, this one is clearly the one he's most passionate about. The love and care he has for it is incredibly visible. It's one of my favorite things about it because you can tell how much of a nerd he is for both science and fantasy with the level of thought he put into it, how much the mechanics of the world dictate every aspect of the series. From the dynamics of each show, the music, and even to the clothes the characters wear. Science is very uniform, logical, and organized because it's all based on constant real-life rules, so characters from the science side have very clean-cut, orderly outfits that present how much they follow that. While magic is the opposite, being a much looser power system that isn't dictated by strict rules. The outfits are much freer, being dressed like or unkept because it's based around historical religion, so a lot of the outfits are reminiscent of that. If we take a look at these two characters who at the core have the same outfit, being a long sleeve shirt and long pants, they look and feel completely different. He's thought of that. The series has several rules and it follows every single one of them, but it's never in your face. It all subtly presents the dichotomy of the two worlds. But it isn't the attention to detail or consistency that makes it impressive. It's how it's done being with two different shows, each one changing the other, creating one of the biggest and most immersive worlds in anime. And that's saying a lot when you remember it's a small city. I briefly mentioned it, the music in this show follows the same rules. Science having this steely technological sound easily electrifying any scene that it's a part of, alive with a ton of energy. While magic is orchestral, being more foreboding like a grand ritual is taking place. It's fantastic, especially because of how prominent it is. It's the type of music where the moment you hear the beginning of a song, you immediately know where the moment is going and get a rush of excitement from it. But one of the other main reasons for watching it this way is that with each entry there's always a small visual improvement in the art and animation that constantly build on each other, improving and influencing the one that follows. It's pretty hard to notice at first until you get to Railgun S, since the main arc of it is taking place at the same time with Index and even overlapping because it's the same arc from it. You get to see the same scenes done with a higher budget and it's a night and day difference. There is so much more detail in the environments and character models that Railgun S is basically a modern remake of the arc from the original season. It really shows how popular the series has become from the original, going from cost-effective CG blood to incredible animation sequences. But I want to make it clear that while this is a big upgrade, being more polished, the original still got around the lower budget by compensating the lack of detail with fun, big expressions and surprisingly more animation throughout it. And this was only because of the director, JC staff veteran Hiroshi Nishikiori, who was the perfect choice for this because of his work on the amazing Azumanga Daioh. He knows how to work with less to get more, and when you become aware of this, you see the DNA. While Railgun was directed by Tatsuyuki Nagai, who directed higher budget series like Anohana, Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, and Toradora, series I would implore all of you to check out if you haven't already. They're all very high polished shows that you can see his influence on Railgun having more dynamic shots to see all the improvements, but that means the animation is going to be saved for the bigger moments. Index keeps them way simpler to focus on the extra personality. Both are good for their own reasons, and I think it was a smart idea to give it to two different directors so they feel completely unique to each other while being in the same universe. Alternating between the two on a yearly/bi-yearly basis also kept the franchise fresh for viewers because of it, and it still applies when binging them now. One of the surprising results of this is that when certain scenes overlap between both, you get to see how the same moment is envisioned by two different directors, which is really interesting because of the different approaches to them. A lot of people say it's just those moments viewed from the character's perspective, but that goes out the window for some pretty obvious reasons. It does create some slight inconsistencies on the viewer end, but doesn't affect the show since they're just different interpretations to the same event, all of them leading to the same place. But this is why release order is so important. Because while you can watch it the other way, then it still works. The visual quality and tone will be going all over the place. Railgun is made after Index, so watching it before means you'd be getting a visual downgrade and it would distract away from the simple yet fun direction of it. Watching them separate means you don't get the unique world expansion that comes from alternating from the two, making them really feel like two separate shows and less lived in overall. Which is what I did my first time checking it out, but now rewatching it properly, I can say I missed out on the best experience. And I want to stress this, please do not watch true chronological order. This is when you watch the franchise in the exact order of everything happening, which means alternating between specific episodes or sets of episodes across all the entries. The production quality would really be going all over the place by doing this, and it would take a lot of work to pull this off. When I see someone recommend this, it really frustrates me because even though it is possible to watch it like this, it was never intended to be, and this order scares people from the series because of how complicated it is. Please don't do this. Raildex is much simpler than most people would expect, and release order is the best way to experience it. As much as I've been praising Raildex, it's definitely not a perfect series, and I can't recommend it without talking about its flaws. The first being that Season 1 of Railgun is definitely the weakest of the batch, and this is because the first 10 episodes are really slow, especially when you're coming off Index Season 1. It starts before it, so the world hasn't kicked off yet, so it makes sense why, but you're basically watching a slice of life anime. They still fill out the world and introduce characters, so you can't skip them. It picks up immediately right after, with each episode being solid. It just sucks you have to work to get to them. Index is a lot more packed with story arcs, one after another, which makes it a consistent, quick, and fun watch. But that means some of those arcs are weak, with moments where it's hard to understand what's happening or what the character's goal is. And I was feeling this even after rewatching it, already having an idea of where the story is going. Honestly, they aren't even that big, it's more that the writing is consistent and easy to understand, and then it drops out of nowhere. Luckily, this doesn't happen a lot, so it doesn't bog down the rest of it. While I haven't talked about it much, the characters of Raildex are really solid. Toma and Misaka are incredibly interesting that it makes sense why they're the main characters of their own shows. I know I haven't gone into them, but it's because a lot of their characters is presented throughout all the arcs, and I want to keep those a secret. Both shows easily being at their best when one of them appears. Each arc also slightly tipping the two worlds closer and closer that they're basically touching by the end, and it's incredible to see. All the other characters are interesting and fun as well that you want to see more of them. Sazen being one of my favorites, easily stealing any scene she's a part of in Railgun. Cast overall is really varied and it keeps both series fresh, which is where Index herself comes in. Ironically, for being the titular character, she's easily my least favorite. When she's introduced, she's this really interesting person with a ton of insight and knowledge to give about the world of magic. But after her first arc, she devolves into a whiny brat that only wants to eat and get angry at Toma for anything he does, and this is literally the only thing she does for the rest of the run. It got old so fast that when she was on screen, I knew where the scene was going immediately. She's really annoying that it makes me happy that she's not involved in most of the arcs, and again, that's saying something for the titular character. This also leads to my biggest complaint, and that is all the quote-unquote anime moments in it. And I want to specify that I love it when shows lean into this stuff. Wacky expressions, exaggeration for jokes and movement, I love it all, but it has to be appropriate for the series it's in. Raildex has the ones I mentioned, and they're fine, even great. What I'm referring to is all the fan service. And this is something that plagues both of them, but Index especially since Toma's the guy. I'm not into fan service, but it's not even that. It's because of how it's done. Toma walking in on a girl, or multiple. Someone falling on another, landing in a compromising position. A girl sleepwalking into his bed, in her underwear. And these are just a few examples. It's done in the most painfully cliche anime way that it feels like it would be a joke in a parody series. And it does it so many times, especially in season 2. The series has this incredibly tight vision that is really confident that it doesn't need this, so when they do happen, they feel super out of place. I do have one more issue, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Despite all of that, it still doesn't stop it from being an amazing series that creates such unique experience you won't find anywhere else. Because while it does so many different things, each being great, it's when they're all combined that you see how incredible it is. And there is a specific arc that presents that perfectly, so I'm gonna be hopping into massive spoilers, so skip to this time if you don't want to see. Trust me, they're big because of how it affects both series. Once you watch all 4 entries, come back. Halfway through Index Season 1, Toma bumps into best girl Misuka, and one fun little exchange later, he meets her strange twin sister, who he ends up hanging out with briefly when he sees her taking care of a kitten. It's a really funny scene that has a lot of charm because of her sense of humor and that you can really tell how much she loves the little guy. Something we saw a little before, but here we really get it when she guilts Toma into taking it in. When he makes a quick stop and leaves it with her, he comes out to see that she's gone and that she left it on its own, which is really weird for her. He goes into an alley only to discover her body, bloodied and destroyed. When he calls police to look into it, the horrible murder site is clean as if nothing happened. The horror story he witnessed is just gone. He knows what he saw, so he runs deeper to find something, only to find her alive and well. But that isn't the Misuka he saw. It was one of thousands. The horror story wasn't that his friend was killed, it's that there's so many of them and that they're used to this. This is a turning point for Toma because while we've seen him deal with the darker sides of magic, he sees that for the first time with science up close and personal. He no longer trusts the city because it's clear they got rid of all the evidence. When he goes to find Misuka, he learns about the experiment, to kill 20,000 sisters to achieve a level 6 Esper. When he figures out where Misuka is, she's just there alone. And she's there because she's concluded the only way to stop the experiment is for her to die. Railgun taking place before Index, you see Misuka before the clones, still living in the perfect world of Academy City, until one day Saten says she saw someone who looked just like her, which reminds her of an old rumor about level 5 cloning. Something she heard about a while ago that even followed her, but just pushed it aside because it obviously couldn't be true. But airing after Index, we already know, which makes her hope even sadder. When someone tips her off, she starts looking into it herself, breaking into labs, hacking their systems. We see the full range of her resourcefulness, until she finds what she's looking for, and it's incredibly heartbreaking. You see all her hope just disappear, only left with shock, horror, and anger. The city she trusted betrayed her, lied to her, and you can see all that pain in this scene. It's something that we knew she would learn about and it lived up to it. But then she reads that it was cancelled, which relieves her and she goes back to her happy life. We want her to stay like this, be happy, not suffer through all the guilt of the clones. That it just hurts to see her hope. The next episode is just rubbing salt on the wound because this false joy is just stretched out for the entirety of it. It's a fun episode, but when you know, you're just waiting for the reality to shatter. And it does when she finds one face to face. I love the next episode because before this we only saw Toma interact with the clones. And while we see their humanity through him, this is before he knows she's the clone, so to us we're just meeting someone new. While the episode is titled Level 6 Shift, the title of the previous one appears before to show it's a continuation from that one. It's titled Sisters, because she now knows the experiment is still active, but mainly because throughout the episode her feelings evolve. She feared and worried about them, but here sees their silly side, being childish. The whole episode presents that they're a lot alike to her, not because they're clones, but because they're human. They're still very different and it creates these great interactions between them. You see them bicker, mess with each other, you see them become sisters. It's a feeling that both of them cherish, especially the clone, which makes their fate sadder. You've seen them meet their older sister for the first time and connect with her, knowing this will be the last moment before she dies. While Misaka finds a new view on them and is content with them existing, but she still wants to find who created them, and in doing so, discovers their current purpose. The entire fight with Accelerator, she's motivated to win. Not because she wants to live, but because she met her older sister. The fight is brutal and it ends with her crawling away. Not to run away, but to get the pin Misaka gave her. It's a quiet moment. Her face says everything. Knowing she's about to die, holds the pin wanting to see her one more time. Misaka finds her too late, only to see her final moment. From here on, her goal is to stop the experiment and let her sisters live, and she does this by infiltrating and destroying all the labs that are involved. One of the most powerful scenes is just her realizing that the city is behind all of this, her trust being betrayed, and she is truly alone with nowhere to get help. Almost dying countless times and risking becoming a criminal to achieve her goal until she goes to the last lab and it's abandoned. She thinks she's won, she thinks they gave up. The experiment is cancelled, her sisters can live. She's finally at peace when she bumps into Toma. It's the same moment from before, but now when her sister appears, everything is different. In season 1, they hid her face not to give anything away, but here we see the pure utter shock. This face from season 1 made Misaka look disgusted by her, and with how it's presented from Toma's point of view, we're supposed to think that. But after everything in Railgun, after everything she had to destroy, after almost dying, she thinks she's won only to realize it was all for nothing. We then go through all of what we saw in Index again, Toma going to her place, finding the stack of notes. And this is what I mean, the same arc all of a sudden has so much more weight now. In Index it might have seemed random, but now we know the story behind it. How she got it and why it's there. Everything you heard during season 1, we've now seen it.
However you came to have these plans, I'm guessing it wasn't legal. Why are all those laboratories marked like this?
Think about it for a sec. They kind of look like targets, don't they? Because that's what they are, or were. In the end, I decided against using my railgun on all of them. A high-tech laboratory costs hundreds of millions to equip, right? If I wanted to, I could use my powers to short-circuit everything. It wouldn't be hard. With the equipment useless, the lab would shut down, and the project would be stopped. At least that's what was supposed to happen.
We just have to convince the researchers of one thing. That they were wrong about Accelerator. That he's actually incredibly weak.
Don't you see that's impossible? There's no way that could happen. I've only come face to face with Accelerator one time, but that doesn't matter. I can tell. A fight with him isn't a question of who's going to win and who's going to lose. It's a question of how much punishment he wants to dish out.
This face is that of someone who's completely defeated. She got faked out of her happy ending and had to endure it not one, not two, but 3 times. That this line hits completely different.
Maybe the world you live in is full of happy endings. Maybe good always triumphs over evil. Not for me. There's no place for me in a world like that.
And after knowing everything, especially this one.
My reason for interfering here might be selfish. I know that. But it doesn't change the fact that I don't want you to die tonight because of me.
No, Misaka!
Her having to shoulder it all by herself, lying to her friends. When you see it from her perspective, Toma really did walk into all of this. The bridge scene is my favorite in the entire franchise because you see the world building and the placement all come together that this scene is oozing with substance everywhere in both versions. I prefer Railgun S's version though because there is so much more emotion present in it than in general throughout the season. Tatsuyuki Nagai did a fantastic job conveying it, but here is where you see his experience at full work. Nagai focusing the shots to see the nuances of the characters that say way more than just showing their faces. Having them be active in the scenes, like how Toma confronts her, cornering her in the shot because he has all the power in it. And when you do see their faces, the emotion is so palpable. The level of anger and determination Toma has, how she feels so conflicted that she can finally tell someone about everything but not wanting to involve him. Even the dialogue packs so much of a punch.
I read all about the project, about all of your sisters, the experiments and everything. So like I said, Let's cut the crap.
That paper?
Hearing Toma be the instigator is so satisfying, especially after seeing him be a punching bag for 2 seasons. And the guy even added this, Toma raising his arm to stop her, which at first glance is clever because you think it's the one with a magic breaker, but no, it's his normal one. His right hand has all the papers in them, it has all the power of the scene. It's making her powerless. Him raising the other means he's gonna stop her. Not a magic breaker, him. Their actual fight, you can tell how much she hates herself for everything. The clones, their death, failing them. Everything is used to feel what they do that you can watch the scene without audio and still have an idea of what's going on. But I'm only talking about his emotional scenes. For a long time I always thought people liked Railgun more because of the super powered high budget fights, but after seeing the guys take on the fight with Accelerator, I have never felt so wrong in my life. His fights are so much more visceral, seeing Toma barely making it, taking so much damage with every move, while in Index he makes it through without a scratch. I thought he was supposed to have no look at all. When the fight actually starts, Nagai, instead of making it fast like Index, has less punches, but the shot angles, visuals, and sound effects completely compensate. Just this scene where he pulls his arm back, it's building the anticipation holding us here. Then his foot quickly pulling us forward, stretching it even more, and then one final shot where it builds it as much as it can until it snaps, exploding with the blow connecting. And I do want to mention that this scene is done with no music, so the sound effects do all of the talking. Hearing him clench his fist, the speed of his step, and finally the wind building from his punch. Makes it feel like it's shaking the earth. His fight also keeps the camera super tight on the action with interesting angles so you can feel the power of all of his blows, as well as make the fight dynamic. And the emotion of the characters he keeps throughout all of it, it's incredible. Which leads to the final issue I hinted at. When I brought up the director's work earlier, you guys may have noticed that for Nagai, I brought up 3 while Nishikori I only mentioned 1. And this is because his directing work leaves a lot to be desired. A lot of his shows have a rating below a 7, and what's even more noteworthy is that a lot of those are action and dramas. My main point is he mainly excelled in comedy, but falls short in more serious genres, and that is very apparent when you see the same moments done by Nagai like we just went through. And it's hard for me to even say his area is comedy because his other productions in that area are low rated as well. I will always argue that he was the perfect person to do the first season because of the limitations, and I respect him because he laid the groundwork for this entire franchise on a low budget. But whenever I seen the guys take on the same scenes from Index, the music, the shots, I was so much more engrossed in the scenes because he really knows how to convey what the characters are feeling. Nishikori's are all incredibly flat and uninteresting in comparison. I feel like he should have been switched out with someone more competent afterwards. After seeing the guy's work, you see the massive untapped potential in Index. While seasons 1 and 2 are both solid, 2 even being better than the first, I feel like this is more of a result of the budget increase, the Railgun influence, and better story arcs rather than his own work. He's just making it by with what he knows, and while it's been working out for him, it will only last him so long. The moment the show primarily focuses on action and drama, I feel he's going to fall flat. There is so much more I can talk about, but this video is long enough as it is. All in all, Raildex has one of the most interesting worlds, characters, and powers that I've seen, and while there are many anime you can say the same thing for, it's how you explore all of those things that make it so great. Building off one another in every way, creating this one-of-a-kind experience I still haven't seen anywhere else. And that's what keeps me and many others wanting more. It's a series where there is still so much to explore and one that hasn't ended. A series that I will follow into the next part of its journey that I hope to talk to you about real soon. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you build a franchise. If you guys hit the end of the video, I always appreciate that, especially for this one. I have been working on this for 3 months. I never thought it would be out, but here it is. I am very happy with how it turned out. Please tell me what you think in the comments, but for real, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye guys, thank you for watching.